A pivot is one foot stays exactly where it was, right? One foot has to stay. It may spin, but it has to stay exactly where it was, which means you can't be jumping tracks and pivot.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. A pivot isn't failure. If anything, it's a sign that you're paying attention, because every plan works in theory, but when it hits reality almost always wins. And so today we're going to walk through how to recognize when it's time to pivot, how big the pivot should be, and how to adjust without spiraling yourself or confusing the people who work for you or with you. So Gwen, we were going to start this off. I had this beautiful outline. It was a beautiful outline. I just want everybody to take my word for it. I'm not going to show it to anybody, but it's a beautiful outline. And I wanted to kick us off by talking about why leaders resist pivoting, because I see that a lot. And really, it was a little bit of a passive aggressive way for me to talk about the sunk cost fallacy, because I just think that holds business owners back so often. But before we started recording, yes, that is a fact, I think, is,
it does.
I've already spent so much time, energy, effort, whatever. I have to keep going. But when I brought that up, you were like, well, yes.
And
why don't you go ahead and finish the yes and for us?
I also said, I think we often are pivoting too easily because everything is so accessible. It makes it really easy to change.
And that kind of I just got a little ouchy there. And the reason I got a little ouchy there is because I'm a big tech fan. And you're right. Everything is so accessible that we can just change. 10 years ago even, right? 2015. It would not be easy to scrap your email service provider and start using a different email service provider. Right? But today you could do that and probably have your deliverability back to what it was before in 1 to 2 weeks versus back in the day, it would feel like 3 to 6 months, right? You could today you can build a course in a weekend and be selling it on Monday.
My old, put on my very, very old hat, of when I first started doing knitting as a profession. And I wrote patterns back. This was back in 2000, so 25 years ago. All knitting patterns were delivered as physical pieces of paper. Okay. Probably 10 years, most patterns were being sold as PDFs. Okay. And I would say it took a different commitment back when I started to be a pattern writer, because you had to either buy a really expensive printer to be able to print the patterns at that you needed at that time, or you had to do a print run with a printer.
And by with a printer, you mean a printing house,
a professional printing house. Yeah. And so if you made a mistake, it was there on all 100 copies that you paid for. There wasn't a quick and easy way to fix it. None of that happened. And I said, and although people will say, but why didn't you just do a PDF back then? It was like, well, because the software that you needed to create a PDF back then was $500. It wasn't included as an option on every print screen,
Yeah, two things. Let's be fair to those of us who are dinosaurs over here. $500 back when a McDonald's Happy Meal was $5. Okay, so let's control for the cost of inflation. But also back then, that software wasn't like go to a website, download it immediately to your computer. Like you had to go to a special store and buy the box and then spend 2 hours with all the CDs loading that software into your computer in order to print that one pattern.
And then of course, most people didn't know how to do all of that on top of it. I mean, it just, it was a whole different world. Right. And so back in early 2000, the number of people writing knitting patterns was significantly less than it was in 2010, just 10 years later, because you didn't have the same barrier of entry. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we've gotten to the same point with pivoting. We don't have the same barrier of entry of deciding to do something different because there are lots and lots of options out there. And we have so much more access, not only just within tech, which, that list is enormous, but even access to others. Writing a program, used to be like, we have to find a programmer and this, that, and the other thing. Well, now you can find a programmer. You can find a programmer that will charge you dirt compared to what your current, pay is. We have VAs in, the Philippines that are making way, way less, but it's still a good living wage for them there than what that same rate would be here. I mean, we've got access to the world in a way that we never had access to even not that long ago.
Well, I mean, depending on what we're trying to write programs for, I mean, we can open up ChatGPT, tell ChatGPT what we want to program, and it'll spit out the code, and we don't actually have to know what any of the gobbledygook means because ChatGPT will tell us where to put all of that information.
Yeah.
And then we'll have something that is fairly usable that didn't cost us anything more than our $20 a month subscription.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So that's the thing. We've got so many more possibilities. I think it's become too easy for us to change. And where I get concerned, where we're talking about the pivot and the non-pivot, is I think we often don't pivot where we should and we pivot where we shouldn't.
Okay, hold that thought because I'm going to want you to come right back to it. So on one hand, we have this issue that the plan stops working and we dig in our heels, right? We resist a necessary pivot because we've already spent so much time, energy, money into this single course of action. We don't want to look inconsistent. We don't want to look like we don't have our stuff together. And we're afraid that switching gears will make it look like the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing or whatever. The original vision, like we can so clearly see the future state and we can't let go of the fact that reality is telling us that's not going to pan out. So that's on one hand. The other hand is it's so easy to switch gears that we're switching gears so much that we're not actually following a plan.
And where I think, like I said, what I think the interesting problem is probably the places that we need to pivot, we're not. And the places that we don't need to pivot, we're putting energy and time into pivoting.
So explain that more. I need more words, please.
Okay.
And thank you.
So I'm going to give you a very tactical kind of example because I know
I love those
when we can do that, right?
Yeah.
So here's a tactical example. We have an employee that we know is just not cutting it anymore for whatever reason. Either they've never quite cut it or they were cutting it, but life has changed enough and it's no longer working, whatever. I watch my clients take weeks and months and in some cases years to let that person go, which is a pivot because we've got to stop using this person. We have to train somebody new. We have to reevaluate, is this position even the position that we need to be hiring for? I mean, like there's a whole lot of things there. You might not think of it as a pivot, but it's a pivot within your business. But we're waiting a tremendous amount of time on that. But at the same point, we think that because we can save $1, we need to move from payroll system A to payroll system B, not counting all of the hassle of actually moving payroll systems. I'm trying to make them both HR sort of related issues.
Yeah, I like this. I like this.
So that they're kind of similar, right? And so, it's like, was that pivot worth it? Probably not. in the big scheme of things. But it felt like, well, but I'm making progress because we're going to be saving some money, or now we can do this one thing that we weren't able to do before, or whatever it happens to be. Where the bigger issue, the thing that we really need to be making the pivot on, we're avoiding because it's hard, because of sunk cost, because of loyalty, because of any of a number of things that we don't want to address. And so I think we use pivoting into other things as another one of those, I'm doing something productive. I'm making a productive change, but we're often not doing it where it actually is providing productive value.
Okay. So I'm thinking through, because I really like your example of I don't want to call them a bad hire, but the staff member who's just not doing what we need them to do, is not fulfilling the function we need.
It's no longer the appropriate role.
And I want to use that example because, first of all, I think you're right. I think most people don't look at performance management issues or, letting somebody go, reclassifying somebody, restructuring. I don't think they look at those as pivots. I think, first of all, I think they look at them as failures. And it feels finite, right? Because, they might think a pivot is, we'll take them from doing data entry to doing graphic design. They don't think of, we're going to let somebody leave the organization so we can bring somebody different in to fulfill that function as a pivot. So I like that example. So I would say, like, using that example, some early warning signs. So one thing that I have heard you kind of coach clients through, is, setting a reasonable time frame for where you're actively working with the individual to manage their performance, right? To help them understand what's expected of them, what is needed, how to do it, make sure they're appropriately trained, like all of that good stuff. And then having a timeline set on that, like, right, we're not going to give it a year, but we're going to give it a set period of time. And if at the end of that set period of time, we don't see improvement, then that's a sign that this is not the person, this person got you here, but they're not necessarily the person to get you there. Is that a fair, parallel? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I would say in other examples that what we would say is, you don't see any traction after a reasonable test period, right? You tried that new marketing tactic, whatever it was, and we're just not getting any traction. So the second thing is when there's friction in your processes. And I think you could probably say is like people are one of those areas where there can be a lot of friction if you have the wrong person in a role.
Oh, yeah.
Help us understand like what that friction looks like, because here's what I hear when I'm working with teams. That's just so-and-so. They've always been that way.
Yeah. Or that they don't like change. That's another one of my favorites. They don't adjust to change well. Okay, that can be fine, but maybe not here, right? It can also be things like, but they got me through this. This is one of my very favorites that I think
it's a loyalty one there.
It's the loyalty one. It's what I call misplaced loyalty. That they helped me get through this particular situation, and so now I have to be loyal to them forever. Keeping in mind, they never did it as a favor.
But I think especially when we've got our solopreneurs who have like expanded to, anybody who started as a solopreneur and hired one person and then another person, right? They do feel like those early hires did them a favor.
But you didn't. They didn't work for you for free. You paid them to do a job. And yes, maybe they were outstanding and really did help you get through a time. But that doesn't mean that they get to just keep getting paid.
Right. So,
right? So that I helped you, they helped me through a time. They've been with me forever. Any of those kind of things are all big flags in my world.
Right. So lack of traction after a reasonable test period, which, I'm testing these thoughts against like the human element of somebody in the organization. Cause I know that people are always like, oh, that's different, but it's not really different, right? Like somebody who you've trained, you've explained what the expectation is. They're not getting any better. That's a lack of traction after a reasonable test period.
Yep.
Second is the high friction in processes. The person who resists change, but we never did it like, it was fine before. Or my personal favorite, but I don't mind doing it this way. I don't mind the old way.
I don't mind it. It doesn't matter to me that it takes me 10 hours when doing it the other way would only take me 2.
Right. I don't mind it. I like typing all that stuff manually, Gwen. It's fun. Right. So that's, high friction in process. The third, and this is a biggie, I think, when it comes with teams, but it manifests in other ways as well, is confusion among the team. When people are like, wait, but isn't Susie supposed to do that? And you're like, oh, no, Susie's not going to do that. Somebody else is. And they're like, but wait, doesn't that fall within Susie's role? But because you're working around Susie.
Right.
Because there's too much friction involved in trying to get Susie to do what you need to do. It's uncomfortable.
Susie doesn't like change.
All of those things, right? And you start to work around, and then people don't quite understand why the payroll person isn't doing payroll. Somebody else has to jump in and help them. What else do you think is confusing for the team that might be the sign that you need to pivot? Or in the case of Susie, we need to set Susie onto greener pastures.
Well, and I think the other biggie is it getting the results? I mean, functionally, just is it getting the results that we need it to get? Right? I mean, that's a little bit related to traction, but is the person getting me the results that I want, or is the process, or is the marketing tactic, or whatever it happens to be, getting me the result that we predicted it should get? And were our assumptions on that prediction reasonable and accurate? So, if the assumptions piece is an important piece of it, right? So if I say, Tonya, we need to have 1,000 new customers in the next month, and I want to do it all via email, that would be a reasonable assumption if we had a list of probably 50 to 100,000 people on the list, right? I mean, based on all the numbers and expectations. But my list is closer to 300, 400, something like that, 200. Yeah. So so that would be a really unrealistic assumption with my list, right? Because the data doesn't line up. So that becomes the other piece of, is this a reasonable assumption or is it not a reasonable assumption? But are we able to get the thing that we're looking for based on what we're trying to do? You could have the perfect email campaign, but if we're only emailing it out to 200 people, there is almost no chance on earth that we're going to get 1,000 new customers out of that.
Right.
So is it the assumption, or is it the actual activity? Yeah. Or do we have 100,000 people on an email list and what you're writing is complete gobbledygook? Okay, well then that's about that we're not actually doing the right thing. The tactic itself is not, the specifics of the tactic are not working. So back to, is the person capable or is it not capable if we're putting it toward people? Can they actually do the work or not do the work?
Yeah. So kind of moving out of the people example, because thank you for walking through this though, because I think it was a really good one, and it's not one that people typically use when talking about pivoting. So we've talked about the polar opposites of what makes leaders resist pivoting plus what can make them pivot too much. We've talked about those early warning signs that indicate you do need to pivot. Now I want to kind of go back to the initial conversation, which is the difference between a small pivot and a big one, because as you pointed out, it is so easy to change course these days that we convince ourselves that we're making small, tiny little shifts or tweaks, when in reality, we're making like large movements. So, do you kind of have off the top of your head how you would differentiate between a minor adjustment versus a major adjustment in a business?
So to me, a minor adjustment it takes less than a week for sure, and probably less than a day to make, and generally doesn't affect more than one person on your team.
Okay.
And if you're the team of one, it's always only going to affect one person. But thinking about if you actually had a team, is it actually affecting marketing, accounting, and HR, right? Okay. you may be doing all of those roles, but that's actually three, kind of three team members. So it's like, no, that's not simple. To me, if it's only one, that's probably okay, because it also means that the person that may be being affected can say, this feels like it's tiny, but this is big, because they've got enough understanding and ownership of what's going on. But when it starts crossing multiple team members or roles, or, kind of functional roles, it may seem little per each person, but we multiply that, and that becomes a much bigger thing pretty quickly. Because it's rarely additive. It's usually multiplicative.
Yeah.
It's not 1 and 2 and 3, is 6. We're doing multiplication here. And so, we're growing exponentially as we go, and it becomes a very big thing very, very quickly. And so, but it seems small to everybody. For you, it's 2, for me, it's 2, and for them, it's 3. Okay, well, that doesn't seem too bad, right? That's like 7. But it's 2 times 2 is 4 times 3 is 12. Ooh, wait, that's actually a fairly big number, right?
Right.
And so I think that's one of the places that why if it's over multiple people. And then also, how quickly can you do it, right? So a pivot may be, a tiny adjustment really can be done quickly. A pivot is going to be affecting more people, even though it still may be able to be done fairly quickly, but there's other people that have to be made aware of it and what's going on. Keeping in mind that some of the people may not be your employees, but they may be your customers. Because if you need to tell one employee and all your customers, that's not 2 people. That's one person on your team and, I don't know, 10, 20, 100 other people. So it's probably a pivot. So, an example for me that's a pretty easy example that I think many of us have dealt with at some point in time is changing your calendaring system. That sounds like a relatively simple thing and could be a minor adjustment, but to some degree it's a pivot, because it affects you, it affects all of the people, it affects, all of the things. And it's a classic example of it's so easy to do. We just do those things without necessarily thinking about them. Right. And so that's where I feel like that's not an adjustment. That's a pivot. We've pivoted from one system to a completely different system. Now, like I said, may not be hard to implement, may not be hard to communicate, may not be hard to do any of those things, but it's still a pivot that we need to think about what all of the consequences are. An adjustment would be, we're no longer offering 30-minute calls. We're only offering 25-minute calls. So we're just discontinuing one and creating another, or changing the 30-minute to say 25-minute, adjusting the time. That would be an adjustment. That's pretty minor. And I could easily see that, where I might say, you know what, I need to have 5 minutes in between my calls. I don't actually want to put a 5-minute block in there. I just want 5 minutes between my calls. So make them 25 and 55, and that'll be fine. Right. So to me, that's the adjustment versus a pivot, versus what we think of as a pivot of, I'm offering one-on-one services and now I'm offering a group program, which is obviously a pivot.
So would you consider that, because I think that's a really good example, is that a change in the business model, or is that a change in the offer? Is that a change in the structure? Where do you classify that? Because that is such a common one too. And people will say, exactly, oh, I'm just doing a slight little I'm doing a slight little adjustment here. I'm just going to go from working one-on-one to working one-to-many, without realizing you've got to change your marketing.
So my answer to your question of, is it a business model? Is it, what were all the things?
Is that actually changing your model, your offer, or your structure?
And my answer is yes. Because it's actually all of those things. Yeah. Which is back to, it's a major pivot. It's a major pivot, because not only, are we affecting a ton of people, but we're touching pretty much everything that we do. Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like today is the day. This is the episode of the hard, uncomfortable examples, right? Because, as we were talking about those early warning signs of needing to pivot, we used a human example, right? Like the staff member who's just not quite doing what we need them to do in the way that we need them to do it. So for here, I want to talk about this going from one-to-one to one-to-many, because of course that is the great poster child of a successful business, at least successful coaching, successful online business in that realm. We're told that working one-on-one trades time for money, working one-to-many is the way to scale. So how do you go about deciding if that's the adjustment to make, and also the trajectory? Like, how long do you take to make that kind of adjustment? If it is major, which I agree it is, but talk me through that.
Well, and so to me, that's one of the things that I think is also bad about the term pivot, is we've made pivot be major changes. Oh, I just pivoted. No, you didn't. You changed frickin' everything about your business. That is not a pivot. Changing from, a sauna to, I don't know, up
Airtable.
Click up. Yeah. Right. That's a pivot. Deciding to offer one-on-one sessions twice a month and once a month, that's a pivot. But going from one-on-one to group, that's a whole business model change. There's so many things that go with it. I don't even know what we want to call it, but I think that's part of the problem, is that we're lumping way too much under the pivot category.
Yeah. Well, what it reminds me of, as you were talking about that, is, I worked for an organization that, prior to me working for them, so they had a very successful course creation program. And at one point they decided that they were so successful in the course creation space that they wanted to branch out into professional development, working with HR departments to deliver professional development, because they really did have this great system of course creation. And it took losing about $1.5 million, $2 million at a major event for them to recognize that, though in their mind it really was just an extension of their core offer, right? We're great with course creation here, we can be amazing with course creation over there. That it really was an entirely different business, because while they were great with course creation here and the mechanics of course creation are the same, who they were targeting in that business had no overlap with HR departments in large corporations. The sales cycle was different. The language, like everything about how you sell what seemed like the same basic offer was an entirely different animal. And unfortunately, they didn't recognize that until they were like 2 million deep.
Right. Yeah. And that's the issue, I think, is that we have to realize that pivots really should be relatively small. I mean, if you think about, pivoting, that's a tiny move. I
only think about pivoting in like basketball and figure skating. It is very subtle.
It is very subtle. And that really is what a pivot is. If you I love your basketball, because I used to play, so that one I can, use in my mind. A pivot is one foot stays exactly where it was, right? One foot has to stay. It may spin, but it has to stay exactly where it was, which means you can't be jumping tracks and pivot, right? And so to me, this is the piece that when we start looking at these bigger pieces, it's not a pivot. It is a business model change. It is a customer, addressing change, because as you have pointed out to me multiple times, the person who wants a one-on-one service is often a different person than who wants a group program. Even though you may be offering the same service, right? Between those two. And so there's different marketing that goes behind it. You've got to figure out how you're managing the payments. And, all of that stuff that is related to it is a really, really big change. And I think that's the important piece that you have to not lose track of when we're talking about this. But we want to think of it as a pivot because of the sunk cost. Well, I've already invested all of this other, so this is just a tweak to what we're doing.
So I like kind of you explaining the basketball example, right? One foot stays in the same spot. How do you suggest, advise, recommend business owners to stay grounded when things are changing? How do they keep that foot in that one spot while shifting the other foot?
Well, and I think that comes back to, do you actually need to pivot, a true pivot, or do you need to make a big change? right? And being comfortable with the fact that if I'm making a big change, let's own it as a big change. Let's realize that there's going to be some significant pieces. If we're going to pivot, being really clear about what are the things that we're holding on to? What is, at that foot that's not moving? What are the things that are standard, right? That we are not changing, even though we may be changing some other aspects about it. And back to how big of a change will it be perceived by anyone outside of our own head? Because for many of us, we can say, oh, this is just a pivot. And then you start talking about it and people's eyes get big. Okay, if people's eyes are getting big, it's not a pivot.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, no, that's a big thing. And you and I have talked about this many times, that sometimes I'll say, I think I want to do this instead. And I feel like it's a pivot. I've learned to ask you, this doesn't feel like this is a giant change. Is it a giant change?
Yeah.
Right? Because in my head, it makes perfect sense. I see how all of the dots line up and how this is very much grounded with the same thing that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you say, no, yeah, this is just, this lines up. This makes sense. We can make this pivot. And other times you're like, no, this is a whole new thing.
Yeah.
This is completely different. And I will tell you, many times in my mind, they are exactly the same.
Right. So, but I think you're bringing up a good point that we can end on, which is that alignment with your team, because I think that does cause so many issues, right? It's so clear in the mind of the business owner, and it's so tiny, right? It's like blush versus bashful back in Still Magnolias, right? It's just pink and pink. But to everybody else, like, this is changing every bit of how I work or who I think I am. I have an associate who's going through, like, revising a mission statement, and there on the table was changing 2 words, and people were in tears, which baffles me, but that's just because sometimes I'm heartless. But over the change of these 2 words, because these 2 words were endemic to their personal identity and what they thought the identity of the company was. Yep. Meanwhile, the business owner is like, yeah, but if we can cut 2 words, then this line goes up a line, and then this all fits so much neater everywhere else, right? Had nothing to do with the words, really, just had to do with word count. How do you keep your team aligned as you're making these pivots, whether they're big or small?
We talked about, the pivot of, like, changing your scheduler, your calendar scheduler. And we did that just about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And so I've been talking about it. We've been debating, and there were reasons that we did it. Mm-hmm. We'd gotten the one I had used forever. I mean, a really long time before people were even using scheduling systems. And so, I was loath to change, because I'm always loath to change, because I know there's always a cost to it. And, we debated and we talked, and part of it was talking with you, but also with Sophia, because she does a lot with it, and to say, how big of a deal do you think this is? And she's like, well, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. And I can probably, get it up and running in a fairly short period of time. And I said, oh, I'm not even worried about that. I can get it up and running in a really short period of time. I've done enough of this kind of work. This isn't a problem. But I could tell she wasn't resistant to it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, and I also could see in that case, she was being pleased by not having to deal with the hassles that we were having.
I was going to say
with the previous one. Right. And so the pivot made sense. Mm-hmm. And we probably implemented it in less than a week from start to finish. From the day we said we're going to do it to make it happen.
Okay. So what I'm hearing there is keeping the team aligned. Part of it is asking the questions, like, how does this change affect you? Not just going in like, oh, this is a great thing to do, we're going to be so much better on the other side of it, but taking the time to ask everybody involved, or even like minorly involved, how will this affect you? How does this affect how you work? How much time you spend? All of this. What else?
So and then the other is, how much is it going to affect the customer? If it's going to affect the customer, in mine, it affects the customer, because, I do a lot of one-on-one work. But we talked about it. It was like, okay, we just need to let them know, and Sophia will start sending out new links, and they'll figure it out.
No, well, and I want to step in there, because yes, you're like, okay, we got to tell the customer. Sophia will send out new links, and they'll figure it out, which is exactly what you said, but your behavior was different. Right. And so what I want to address is also there is a piece of what to say to customers. Some people will intuitively know how to communicate to customers. Other people will not. And so in this case, when you were talking to customers, because you started it off, I think because we had an event coming up. And so you were like, just so you know. But one of the key things in the case of switching the calendaring system was you made a point to say, if anything looks weird with your upcoming appointments, such as the link isn't where you think it should be, there are 2 links and they don't match, you used to get notifications and you're no longer getting notifications.
Right.
The invite appears in your spam folder. You ran through all these like possible occurrences, right? Because what you could have said is, hey, if anything looks weird, just let us know. But you went through the pains of saying, okay, if anything looks weird, which might be this, here's all the weird things that I can predict, or anything that you think is weird that I didn't mention. Please let us know, because it's probably not intentional on our side and we don't see the same things you see. And so we're counting on you to keep us informed. So you asked Sophia how it would affect her. You asked me how it would affect me. You thought of how it would affect you. You thought through how it would affect the customer. And then you actually advised Sophia on how to share that information with the customers. That's the piece that I think a lot of particularly visionary CEOs, that's the piece they forget about, is giving the advice of how to talk about the change to outsiders.
Right. So that it's not like, yes, my crazy COO has done it again.
Or your crazy CMO. Right. Because I think it's the CMO who loves to change things too.
No, it's all of them. It's all of them. But that really is the key, is to be able to say, does this make sense in the big scheme of things, given all of the pieces that have to go on? And like I said, I think it's also about realizing that what we're calling pivots, because it just became a watchword, is really, it's another one of those that an inappropriate word got, absconded into something else, where it's most of the things that people were calling pivots were not pivots. Mm-hmm. But it was the fun word to use of, oh, I'm pivoting because of COVID. No, you're not pivoting. You are making a wholesale change because of COVID.
Yeah, because you want to survive COVID.
Because you want to survive.
And nothing's wrong with that. And so I think really, like, your advice, if I had to sum up the whole episode, right, in like a single sentence, is that when the plan stops working, think it through. Think it through before you decide what to change, how to change, and then think through all the potential consequences, positive and negative, to that decision. Would you add anything?
Because change for change's sake is rarely good.
That is the truth. That is the truth. Okay, so I don't know about you listening, but I'm going to just tell you right now that this episode ended in an entirely different place than I thought it was going to go when we started it.
So much for that beautiful outline that you had.
Just want you guys to know it was beautiful. It's not worth showing you now, but it was beautiful. But the reason that we ended in an entirely different place is really clarity, right? It was, I had this idea, which sounded great in theory, just like communism, I like to say. And I uttered my great idea out loud, and Gwen had a response to it that changed everything, that brought some clarity to my assumptions that I didn't even know were there. And that's often how these episodes go, actually. But that's actually how my conversations with Gwen go. And if you want that same kind of clarity that I get for free, like every week when we record these episodes, you could get that as well for free by subscribing to Gwen's Really Good Question email. And by the way, if you have an idea of a better name for our Really Good Question email, we'll take that. But for now, it's just the Really Good Question email. And you can sign up for that at everydayeffectiveness.com/question. And all it is a really good question dropped into your inbox every single Friday. You can answer it or you cannot. You can internally cogitate over it, or you can automatically archive it. Okay. Generous return policy. Okay. You get all the money you spend on it back because it costs you nothing, but it may just give you something. It may give you a great idea. It may spark something that you didn't even know you needed to be thinking. And that's the purpose of a really good question for the CEOs listening today, because every opportunity you can to get into your CEO brain is an opportunity to be more proactive in your business. And that really is the secret to sustainable success. So think on that, and we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.